A puppy keeps following a vet everywhere he goes, from the clinic to his truck to his doorstep in the rain. At first, he thinks it's just a lost dog looking for food, until he sees the burns on its paws and the fear in its eyes. Something's wrong. The vet tries to return the puppy, but that decision pulls him straight into a world of cruelty and corruption hiding in plain sight. The deeper he digs, the stranger it gets, because this isn't just any dog. There's something hauntingly familiar about the way it looks at him, like it's trying to tell him something. And when the truth finally comes out, it shatters everything he thought he knew about loss, love, and the night that changed his life forever. Why did this puppy find him? And what secret has it carried all this time? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking lot as Dr. Silas Truitt locked up his truck. He'd just finished a house call at the Thompson farm, a difficult breech birth that had left him bone-tired. His weathered boots crunched on the gravel as he headed toward the clinic's back entrance. That's when he heard it, the soft click of claws on stone following behind him. Silas turned to find a mud-splashed beagle mix trailing him, head low but tail giving a hesitant wag. The dog's ribs showed through his dirty coat, and dried mud caked his paws. "Hey there, buddy," Silas said softly, crouching down. The dog inched closer, drawn by his gentle tone. "Where'd you come from?" The beagle's brown eyes held Silas's gaze with an intensity that made his chest tighten. He'd seen that look before, in too many rescued animals that had seen the worst of humanity. "Come on then," he said, pushing open the clinic door. The dog followed him inside without hesitation, as if he'd been waiting for just such an invitation. Inside the exam room, Silas got his first good look at the dog's condition. His heart sank. The pup's paws were raw and blistered, chemical burns from the look of them, and there, partially hidden by matted fur, was a crude surgical scar across his belly. "What happened to you?" Silas murmured, carefully examining the rough suture work. The dog pressed against his leg, trembling slightly but refusing to move away. The slam of the front door made them both jump. Heavy boots stomped down the hallway before a burly man in a stained canvas jacket burst into the exam room. "That's kennel property," the man barked, jabbing a finger toward the beagle. "From Latch Family Kennels. I'm here to collect him." The dog cowered behind Silas's legs, his whole body shaking now. Silas straightened to his full height, placing himself between the handler and the frightened animal. "I'll need to see some documentation," Silas said evenly, "and we'll need to scan for a microchip to verify ownership." The handler's face reddened. "Listen, Doc, that ain't necessary. Mr. Latch runs a legitimate operation. Just hand over the dog." "Standard procedure," Silas replied, keeping his voice calm while reaching for the scanner. "Won't take but a minute." He ran the scanner over the dog's neck and shoulders. Nothing. He tried again, more slowly. Still no reading where a chip should be. "That's strange," Silas said, though he had his suspicions about why the chip wouldn't read. "Looks like it might have been tampered with. I'll need to document these injuries too before—" "Now you listen here," the handler cut in, taking a threatening step forward. "I don't need some country vet giving me trouble. I'll call Mr. Latch himself if I have to." "You do that," Silas said quietly. The beagle pressed harder against his legs, and Silas felt a familiar resolve settling in his chest. The same one that had driven Mira to rescue so many animals, right up until the crash that took her from him. The handler glared at him for a long moment before spinning on his heel. "This ain't over," he spat, storming out. The front door slammed again moments later. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, the beagle followed Silas from room to room like a shadow. During appointments, he waited patiently by the door. While Silas updated charts, the dog dozed at his feet. It was as if the animal knew he'd found safe harbor and wasn't about to let it slip away. As evening approached, Wren Calloway finished cleaning the last of the surgical instruments. She paused in the doorway of Silas's office, watching as he carefully applied antibiotic ointment to the dog's paws. "Those aren't normal burns," she said softly. "No," Silas agreed. "They're not." He'd seen similar injuries before, dogs that had been forced to run on surfaces treated with caustic chemicals. "Latch is going to make trouble," Wren said. "You know that, right?" Silas nodded, gently wrapping the dog's paws in clean gauze. The beagle licked his hand in gratitude. "I know." He thought of the locked file cabinet in his office, filled with carefully documented cases of suspicious injuries from Latch family kennels over the years. He'd been collecting evidence quietly, telling himself he was waiting for the right time. But the truth was, after losing Mira, he'd lost his appetite for fights that seemed impossible to win. "We'll hold him overnight," Silas said finally, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Pending proper documentation and ownership verification." Wren smiled slightly. "Just like that? After all this time avoiding confrontation with Latch?" The beagle rested his head on Silas's knee, those soulful brown eyes gazing up at him with complete trust. "Just like that," Silas confirmed, knowing he was likely starting a fight he'd tried so hard to avoid since Mira's death. But looking down at the wounded animal beside him, he realized some fights chose you, and sometimes the very things you tried to avoid were the ones you needed most. "Let's get him settled in recovery," he told Wren, leading the loyal pup toward the kennel area. Whatever trouble tomorrow might bring, for tonight at least, this dog was safe. And for Silas, that would have to be enough. Wren Calloway stood in the clinic's examination room, her auburn braid swinging as she shook her head at the beagle's injuries. "We need to document everything, Silas. Every single mark." Silas hesitated, his hands gentle on the dog's burned paws. "Wren!" "No," she cut him off, already reaching for the clinic's digital camera. "I know that look. You're thinking about how to smooth this over, make it go away quietly. But we both know what these injuries mean." The beagle whimpered softly as Silas carefully unwrapped the gauze from its paws. Under the harsh examination lights, the chemical burns looked even worse. Angry red patches where fur and skin had been seared away. "Hold him still," Wren instructed, snapping photos from multiple angles. She zoomed in on the half-healed surgical scar across the dog's belly, documenting the crude stitching. This wasn't done by any licensed vet. Silas knew she was right. After 15 years of practice, he could spot backroom surgery from a mile away. The jagged suture line told its own story, one of rushed procedures and ignored protocols. "The chip tampering too," Wren continued, photographing the small raised bump where the microchip should have been readable. "That's deliberate interference with identification. We need to report all of it." The beagle pressed against Silas's leg, as if sensing his internal struggle. For the past year since Mira's death, he'd focused on the quiet work, routine checkups, vaccinations, the occasional emergency surgery. Anything to avoid the kind of crusade that had ultimately claimed his wife's life. But looking down at those trusting brown eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away from this one. "All right," he said finally. "Get me the county reporting forms." For the next hour, they meticulously documented every injury. Silas's weathered hands moved carefully over the dog's body, noting each concerning finding while Wren recorded everything in precise detail. The chemical burns, the suspicious surgery, the disabled identification chip, the signs of neglect and possible abuse. When they finished, Silas stared at the stack of forms on his desk. One signature would set things in motion that couldn't be easily stopped. "It's the right thing," Wren said softly, reading his hesitation. "You know it is." Silas nodded, picked up his pen, and signed. He faxed copies to County Animal Control and filed digital versions in the clinic's system. The beagle dozed in the corner, finally relaxed enough to sleep. Less than 3 hours later, the clinic's front door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Animal Control Director Myron Hobbins stormed in, his khaki uniform stretched tight across his substantial belly, coffee stains speckling his collar. "Where's Dr. Truitt?" he demanded, face already flushed with anger. Silas emerged from his office, standing tall despite the twisting in his gut. He'd known this was coming, but the speed of the response only confirmed his suspicions about the connections between Animal Control and Latch Kennels. "Can I help you, Director Hobbins?" "You can start by explaining this nonsense report." Hobbins thrust a handful of papers at him. "And then you can release that dog to its rightful owners before I charge you with theft of property." "The dog is under medical hold," Silas replied calmly. "Chemical burns require ongoing treatment, and there are serious concerns about identification tampering." Hobbins stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Listen here, Truitt. Latch Family Kennels has a standing contract with this county. They provide an essential service. We don't need some bleeding heart vet stirring up trouble over standard training accidents." "Training accidents?" Silas felt his jaw tighten. "Is that what we're calling chemical burns now?" "I'm not here to debate definitions," Hobbins snapped. "Release the dog immediately or face consequences." "What consequences would those be?" A smug smile spread across Hobbins' face. "Well, for starters, we might need to review your shelter surgery privileges. A lot of paperwork involved in maintaining those. A lot of things that could go wrong in the review process." The threat hit Silas like a physical blow. The shelter surgeries were his way of helping animals whose owners couldn't afford private care, the last remaining piece of Mira's legacy of compassion. Losing those privileges would mean turning away countless animals in need. But looking at the beagle curled up in the corner, at the raw wounds still visible on its paws, he knew he couldn't back down. This wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about everything he'd sworn to protect as a veterinarian. "The dog stays," he said firmly, "under medical hold for documented injuries and suspected identification tampering. You're welcome to review my findings and submit a formal challenge through proper channels." Hobbins's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Truitt. A big one." He jabbed a finger at Silas's chest. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." He stormed out, leaving behind the smell of stale coffee and barely veiled threats. Wren appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "They'll come after the shelter privileges," she said quietly. "I know." Silas ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of what he'd just done settling onto his shoulders. "We could still back down," Wren offered, though he could tell she didn't mean it. "Say we made a mistake in the paperwork." The beagle had woken up during the confrontation. It limped over to Silas, pressing against his legs just as it had that morning. Those eyes looked up at him with complete trust, asking for protection. "No," Silas said finally. "We couldn't. Because some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible to win. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. And sometimes the truest test of ethics wasn't in the big, dramatic moments, but in the quiet choices to stand firm when pressure came to bend. He knelt down to check the dog's bandages, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges. But for now, he had chosen his path. The rest would have to sort itself out. The crisp white envelope arrived the next morning, bearing the county's official seal. Silas's hands weren't quite steady as he opened it. Inside, A single sheet of paper delivered the blow he'd been dreading. Effective immediately. All shelter surgery privileges for Dr. Silas Truitt are suspended pending investigation of operational concerns. He set the letter down on his desk, the words swimming before his eyes. Behind him, the little beagle, who'd earned the nickname Shadow for his constant trailing, whimpered softly, as if sensing his distress. They didn't waste any time, did they? Wren stood in the doorway, her face drawn with worry. She'd started arriving early since the confrontation began, determined not to let him face this alone. Less than 24 hours. Silas picked up his calendar, the weight of each canceled surgery pressing on his conscience. There are 15 spay-neuter procedures scheduled for next week alone. Families who can't afford private rates. Those animals will suffer, Wren said quietly. More unwanted litters, more strays, more euthanasia. That's what they're counting on, that you'll cave to stop it. Silas walked to the window, watching the morning sun creep across the parking lot. Shadow limped after him, burns still visible on his paws despite 3 days of treatment. The dog's trust was absolute, even after everything humans had done to him. We need to be smart about this, Wren continued, pulling out a notepad. If we're going to take on Latch, we need proof. Real proof that can't be buried. She spread several folders across his desk, intake records from the past year. I've been thinking about this since yesterday. Look at the pattern. Silas leaned over the files. Wren had highlighted certain cases. Dogs brought in with suspicious injuries, often by the same handful of people connected to Latch kennels. Chemical burns, bite wounds, unexplained trauma. Most of these were treated and released back to handlers, Silas noted, his stomach turning. We didn't see the pattern because they spaced them out, used different staff. And look at the timing, Wren pointed to dates. Major injuries spike every 6 to 8 weeks, like some kind of regular event schedule. The implications made Silas's blood run cold. He'd heard rumors about underground dogfighting rings in the county, but had never been able to prove anything. Now, studying the evidence Wren had compiled, he couldn't ignore the connections. A knock at the reception window interrupted their research. Miss Bush Henderson, a longtime client, stood shifting nervously with her elderly terrier. Dr. Truitt? I'm so sorry, but I need to cancel Rex's dental work next month. She wouldn't meet his eyes. My husband, he does business with Burke Latch. We can't risk... I understand, Silas said gently, though each word tasted bitter. You have to protect your family. After she left, Wren touched his arm. That's 3 cancellations this morning. Word's getting around. Shadow pressed against Silas's legs, his warm weight a reminder of everything at stake. The dog's belly suture was healing, but poorly, evidence of rushed, careless work. His burns would need at least another week of treatment. Silas could end this now. Release the dog, retract the complaint, preserve his shelter surgery program. Save more animals in the long run by playing it safe. But as he looked down at Shadow's trusting eyes, he knew he couldn't do it. Every oath he'd taken as a veterinarian, every principle Mira had believed in, demanded better. Get me fresh bandages, he told Wren. We'll document everything again, every injury, every test result, every treatment. Then I want you to help me put together a formal packet. For the next 3 hours, they built their case. Silas took detailed photographs of Shadow's injuries, noting measurements and healing progression. Wren compiled lab results showing evidence of repeated trauma and poor post-operative care. They added intake records showing the suspicious patterns, careful notes about the tampered microchip, and a formal request for neutral third-party oversight of Latch Family Kennels operations. They'll fight this, Wren warned as she helped him organize the documentation. Latch has friends everywhere. I know. Silas scratched behind Shadow's ears, earning a gentle tail wag. But sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it costs you. He thought of Mira, who died transporting rescue animals to safety. She'd known the risks of driving mountain roads in a storm, but couldn't bear to leave them in danger one more night. She'd believed that doing right by the helpless was worth any price. The packet felt heavy in his hands as he prepared to send it to the State Veterinary Board. Everything he'd built, his practice, his shelter work, his standing in the community, could crumble. But looking at Shadow's scarred body and gentle spirit, he knew this was a line he had to draw. Some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. Some wounds couldn't be ignored, no matter how powerful the people inflicting them. And sometimes the only way forward was to stand firm and trust that truth, eventually, would matter more than influence. Silas signed the cover letter and sealed the envelope. Whatever came next, he would face it knowing he'd chosen principle over expedience. Shadow leaned against him, offering silent support, as if understanding that this moment marked a point of no return. The clock on the clinic wall ticked past 11 o'clock at night. Silas sat alone in his office, surrounded by stacks of logbooks and files, their musty pages illuminated by his desk lamp. Shadow, the beagle mix, dozed under his chair, occasionally twitching in his sleep. Wren had gone home hours ago, but Silas couldn't stop digging. Something about the pattern of transfers to Latch family kennels nagged at him. He pulled another weathered logbook from the shelf, this one from exactly 1 year ago. His fingers trembled as he opened it. He'd avoided these records since Mira's death, letting Wren handle the paperwork. Now, scanning the entries, his throat tightened. There was her handwriting. Neat, precise strokes, documenting the rescue transport she'd planned that stormy night. The entry stopped mid-page. The next notation, time-stamped 3:27 in the morning, was in different handwriting. Emergency transfer of surviving animals to Latch family kennels per county contract authority. Silas sat back, the air leaving his lungs. He'd been too deep in grief to track what happened to those animals after the crash. The thought that they might have ended up with Latch, the same operation now showing patterns of abuse, made him sick. "What happened to you?" he whispered, tracing the list of animals. 3 senior dogs, 2 mama cats with kittens, a recovering pit bull Mira had especially wanted to save. He pulled out his phone and dialed Jake Martinez, a night watchman at the Double R Ranch bordering Latch's property. Jake answered on the second ring. "Doc Truitt, kind of late, isn't it?" "Jake, I need to ask you something off the record. About Latch's operation." A long pause. "This about that beagle you're holding?" "Partly, but I'm looking at something bigger. Have you ever noticed anything unusual? Especially around their intake of strays and rescue transfers?" Jake's voice dropped. "Look, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but..." He hesitated. "Sometimes, late at night, I see vans coming in. They unload dogs, scared ones, street dogs mostly, but they don't all show up in the county numbers, if you know what I mean." "Where do they go?" "Can't say for sure, but there's this old barn on the back 40. Lot of activity there on fight nights. That's all I'm saying." Silas's pen dug into his notepad. "Fight nights? Every 6 to 8 weeks, like clockwork. Fancy cars show up, money changes hands. Next day, there's always new dogs in the kennels, and some of the old ones just disappear." The pattern Wren had spotted in the injury records aligned perfectly. Silas thanked Jake and hung up, his mind racing. If Latch was running an illegal fighting operation, the steady supply of dogs had to come from somewhere. Strays, overbred puppies, and maybe, his stomach churned, rescue animals redirected through county contracts. Shadow whined softly, pressing against Silas's legs. The dog's chemical burns suddenly carried new weight, markers of a darker system they'd stumbled into. He called Wren. "I need you back at the clinic," he said when she answered. "Bring coffee. We're going to be here a while." 20 minutes later, they sat surrounded by papers, building a timeline. Wren had brought her laptop and was cross-referencing intake records against county shelter reports. "The numbers don't match," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Latch reports taking in maybe 60% of what we can document. The rest just vanish." "We need proof," Silas said. "Real proof, not just patterns and suspicions. We need to get inside that operation." "How? Latch's property is locked down tight." Silas pulled out a copy of the county's animal control regulations. "There's a provision for facility inspections with proper oversight. If we can get state-level veterinary authorities involved..." "They'll warn him first," Wren pointed out. "Give him time to clean up." "Not if we time it right. Jake says they run fights every 6 to 8 weeks. If we can coordinate an inspection to hit during setup..." They worked through the night, outlining a careful strategy. They'd need allies, trusted veterinarians from neighboring counties, rescue organizations with documentation of suspicious transfers, maybe even media contacts as insurance. "We have to be careful," Silas said, watching Shadow sleep. "If we move too fast or tip our hand, we'll lose our shot at exposing the whole operation," Wren finished. "I know, but Silas..." She touched the logbook entry from the night of Mira's crash. "We have to do this. For all of them." The weight of it settled over him. Not just one injured beagle, but a whole hidden pipeline of animals being fed into darkness. The same darkness that had swallowed the last animals Mira tried to save. Shadow stirred and put his head on Silas's knee, brown eyes full of trust. Dawn was breaking outside, painting the clinic windows pink. They had filled 3 legal pads with notes and action items, built a preliminary timeline, and identified potential allies. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. "Get some sleep," he told Wren. "Tomorrow we start making calls. Carefully." She gathered her things, pausing at the door. "We're really doing this, aren't we? Taking on Latch, the county, all of it?" Silas looked down at Shadow, then at Mira's final logbook entry. "Yes," he said quietly. "We are." The morning sun crept across his desk as he sat there, Shadow's warmth against his legs anchoring him in the midst of what was coming. The truth about Latch's operation and its connection to Mira's last rescue would come out. He would make sure of it. He just had to be smart, patient, build the case piece by piece until it was too solid to bury. Shadow sighed in his sleep, and Silas reached down to scratch his ears, finding comfort in the simple trust of a dog who had somehow known to seek him out. Sometimes justice moved slowly, but it moved all the same. Silas sat in his truck outside the sheriff's department, gathering his thoughts. The manila folder on the passenger seat held their carefully assembled evidence, photos, medical records, and troubling patterns that couldn't be coincidence. He checked his watch. 2:15 in the afternoon. Deputy Pierce's shift had just started. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Silas approached the front desk. "I need to speak with Deputy Pierce," he said, "about a county animal welfare matter." The deputy was exactly as Silas remembered, lean, methodical, with steady gray eyes that missed nothing. Pierce led him to a small interview room and closed the door. "What can I help you with, Dr. Truitt?" Silas laid out the folder's contents, starting with Shadow's injuries and the tampered microchip. "We've documented a pattern of suspicious injuries from Latch family kennels, chemical burns, fight wounds disguised as accidents, animals disappearing from county records." Pierce studied each photo carefully, making notes in precise handwriting. "I've seen similar complaints before," he said finally. "They tend to disappear. Mr. Latch has friends in the courthouse." "I know. That's why I'm coming to you first. You have a reputation for doing things by the book." The deputy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Show me your documentation." For the next hour, they went through everything: the injury patterns, the missing records, the night watchman's tip about fight nights. Pierce asked sharp questions, pressing for specifics on dates, locations, and witnesses. "This is circumstantial," he said finally, "but it's enough to justify closer inspection. I'll back your complaint if you can get approval for a facility check." It was more than Silas had hoped for. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Pierce warned. "Latch is careful and connected." From the sheriff's office, Silas drove straight to the county newspaper. June Hollis was exactly where Wren said she'd be, at her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. She looked up as he approached, sharp eyes taking him in. "Dr. Truitt," Wren called ahead. "Show me what you've got." Silas laid out their evidence again, this time focusing on the public accountability angle. June's pen flew across her notepad as he spoke. "I can't print accusations without proof," she said when he finished, "but I can document any official inspection, and if something goes wrong—" She patted the camera hanging from her desk chair. "I'll have receipts." Back at the clinic, Wren had transformed the break room into a war room. Papers covered every surface: treatment records, county contracts, facility requirements. She'd highlighted relevant sections in yellow, cross-referenced with state regulations. "We've got enough for an emergency inspection," she said, pointing to a particular clause. "The cruelty complaint plus documented evidence of tampering with identification. Pierce's backing should force them to act quickly before they can warn Latch." They submitted the paperwork that afternoon. To their surprise, approval came through within hours, likely Pierce's influence keeping it from being buried. At 8 o'clock that evening, their small team assembled in the Latch family kennel's parking lot. June with her camera, Deputy Pierce in his official capacity, Silas and Wren as the complaining veterinary professionals. The facility's exterior was immaculate: freshly painted siding, manicured lawns, a brass sign gleaming under spotlights. Pierce pressed the after-hours buzzer. A security guard appeared almost immediately. "Can I help you?" Pierce showed his badge and the inspection order. "We need to speak with Mr. Latch." They were led through a spotless lobby decorated with framed certificates and awards. Professional photos showed happy families adopting perfectly groomed dogs. Everything screamed legitimate business. Burke Latch met them in his office, all smooth charm in an expensive ranchwear suit. "Deputy Pierce, Dr. Truitt, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "Routine inspection following up on a welfare complaint," Pierce said neutrally. Of course. Latch's smile never wavered. "Though I must say, accusations of improper care are quite serious. They can damage reputations, create difficulties." The threat was perfectly calibrated, present but unprovable. Silas kept his expression neutral. Latch led them through the public kennel areas. Everything was immaculate. The dogs looked healthy, their paperwork in order. But June noticed locked doors leading to other wings, and the chemical smell, harsh disinfectant that seemed excessive for normal cleaning. "I trust everything meets your satisfaction?" Latch's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "I'd hate for unfounded accusations to complicate our community relationships." "We'll need to document our findings," Pierce said professionally. "Of course." Latch's smile widened fractionally. "Though I do hope future concerns can be addressed more diplomatically, for everyone's benefit. They left with nothing concrete, just the lingering scent of bleach and the certainty that they'd seen only what Latch wanted them to see. In the parking lot, June reviewed her photos while Pierce made notes. "Well, that was informative," June said quietly. "The public areas are perfect," Wren agreed. "Too perfect." "We'll need more," Pierce said. "Much more. But at least now we know what we're dealing with." Silas nodded, thinking of those locked doors and Latch's careful threats. They'd confirmed one thing: whatever was happening at Latch Family Kennels, it went deep enough to require elaborate camouflage, and Burke Latch was ready to fight to keep it hidden. "Let's head back," he said. "We've got work to do." The team dispersed into the night, each carrying pieces of a puzzle they couldn't quite see, but they'd taken the first step, and now they knew exactly what they were up against. The morning started like any other at Silas's clinic. He was checking on their temporary ward, the Beagle mix who'd started all this, when he heard vehicles crunching across the gravel parking lot. Through the window, he saw 3 county patrol cars and Animal Control Director Myron Hobbins's mud-splattered truck pulling up. His stomach dropped. "Wren," he called out, keeping his voice steady. "Get your phone ready." She appeared in the doorway, already holding her cell phone up. "Already recording." The front door burst open. 2 deputies entered first, followed by Hobbins clutching a sheet of paper like a victory flag. His coffee-stained shirt was partially tucked into his khakis, and his face wore a smug grin. "Dr. Silas Truitt," Hobbins announced, waving the document. "We have a court order for your arrest on charges of conversion of property, specifically regarding the illegal retention of an animal belonging to Latch Family Kennels." June Hollis slipped in behind them, her camera clicking rapidly. Silas hadn't even seen her arrive, but he was grateful for her presence. "I'd like to see that warrant," Silas said calmly, holding out his hand. The deputies moved forward instead. "Turn around, sir. Hands behind your back." "Is this really necessary?" Wren demanded, keeping her phone steady. "He's a respected veterinarian, not a criminal." "The law's the law," Hobbins said, his voice dripping with false regret. "Can't have people stealing valuable breeding stock." The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Silas's wrists. Behind the treatment area gate, the Beagle mix began to whine, pawing at the barrier. The sound cut through Silas like a knife. "That dog showed signs of abuse," he said firmly. "I filed proper documentation." "Save it for the judge," one deputy interrupted. June's camera continued clicking as they led Silas out. The morning sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A few early arriving clients watched in shock as their veterinarian was placed in the back of a patrol car. "This is going to make quite a story," June called out to Hobbins, "especially the part about arresting a vet for providing medical care." Hobbins's face reddened. "Print whatever you want. Won't change the facts." "No," June agreed, snapping one last photo. "Facts are stubborn things." The ride to the county jail was short but humiliating. Silas watched his clinic disappear in the rear window, wondering how things had escalated so quickly. But he knew how. He'd finally stood up to Burke Latch's operation, and this was the response. At the jail, they processed him efficiently: fingerprints, mugshot, personal items into a plastic bag. The holding cell was cold and smelled of industrial cleaner. Silas sat on the metal bench, his mind racing through options. Less than an hour later, Deputy Edel Pierce appeared outside the cell. Though not part of the raid team, his presence was a welcome sight. "June's outside," Pierce said quietly. "She called me as soon as she saw them heading to your clinic. I've been going through the warrant paperwork." "And?" Pierce glanced around before continuing. "It's full of holes. Judge Kendrick signed it without proper probable cause documentation. The property claim is weak at best. No proof of ownership was attached. They rushed this through to send a message. Message received, Silas said grimly. But I'm not backing down. Good. Pierce nodded. June's arranging bail. We'll have you out of here soon. True to his word, Silas was released within the hour. June was waiting in the lobby, her notebook already out. Care to comment on your arrest, Dr. Truitt? She asked, but her slight smile told him this was more than just reporting. I'd say it's interesting timing, he replied carefully. Right after we conducted that inspection of Latch Kennels. Very interesting, she agreed. My morning edition's already going to print. Local veterinarian arrested after reporting animal abuse. Questions of irregular enforcement. Just a teaser, but it'll get attention. Outside the jail, she turned serious. They're playing hardball, Silas. Are you sure you want to keep pushing? There's no shame in stepping back. He thought about the Beagle Mix's chemical burns, about Mira's crash, about all the missing pieces that didn't add up. What would you do? Fight, she said without hesitation. But I'm a journalist. It's what I do. Well, I'm a vet, and protecting animals is what I do. When Silas finally returned to the clinic, the impact of Latch's influence was already visible. His entire surgical schedule had been suspended, pending review. Warning letters from 3 major medical suppliers sat on his desk, each citing concerns about their ongoing business relationship. Wren met him with a cup of coffee and worried eyes. They're trying to strangle us slowly, she said. Cut off our ability to function. The Beagle Mix trotted over, pressing against Silas's leg. The dog's burns were healing well, but the bigger wounds, the ones that had brought him here, ran deeper. Silas knelt down, scratching behind the dog's ears. The animal's absolute trust, despite everything humans had done to him, made his decision clear. We keep going, he said quietly. But we do it right. Everything documented, everything by the book. They want to play rough? Fine. But we'll make sure everyone sees exactly what's happening. Wren nodded, already pulling out files. I'll start digitizing everything, multiple backups. And we keep treating animals, Silas added firmly. They can mess with our supplies, but they can't stop us from doing our job. The Beagle Mix wagged his tail, as if agreeing with the plan. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher, burning away the shadows. Silas could feel the weight of what was coming. More pressure, more threats, more attempts to break him down. But for the first time since Mira's death, he felt truly certain of his path. The arrest hadn't weakened his resolve. It had crystallized it. Burke Latch had shown his hand, revealing just how far he'd go to protect his secrets. Now it was time to show him that some things couldn't be buried, no matter how much money or influence you had. Silas picked up the first warning letter from his suppliers and began drafting a response. They had work to do, and he wasn't about to let anyone stop them from doing what was right. The late afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows as Silas spread the impound photos across his desk. His eyes burned from hours of scrutinizing images, tracing surgical scars and injury patterns. The Beagle Mix, who had become his constant shadow, dozed in a patch of sunlight nearby. Let's go through these one more time, he muttered, more to himself than to the sleeping dog. Each photograph told its own story of neglect or abuse. Chemical burns on paw pads, poorly healed fractures, suspicious suture patterns that suggested hasty operations. Silas documented everything meticulously, noting dates and details that might connect back to Latch's facility. The beagle stirred and padded over, resting his chin on Silas's knee. Absently scratching the dog's ears, Silas picked up another stack of intake photos from previous cases. Something about this dog's markings tugged at his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. He studied the distinctive tan and white patches, the way the colors blended along the flank. Then his eyes caught on a particular scar, a neonatal belly suture that had healed into a thin white line. The knot pattern was familiar. Too familiar. Silas's breath caught. He knew that suture technique because it was his own, a specific style he used for extremely fragile puppies, where every stitch had to be perfect. His hand stilled on the photo as his mind raced backward through time. "Wren!" he called out, his voice rougher than intended. "Bring me the emergency logs from last year, the night of the crash." Wren appeared moments later, with a thick ledger, concern etching her features. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." Silas took the ledger with trembling hands. The beagle pressed closer against his leg, as if sensing his distress. He flipped through pages until he found the date burned into his memory. The night he lost Mira. His eyes skimmed down the hurried notes from that chaotic evening. There, in his own handwriting, was the entry that confirmed what his heart already knew. 01:15 hours, smallest pup revived, warmed in Dr. Truitt's flannel, emergency sutures completed, pup stabilized. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. That desperate night in the rain, blue lights flashing across wet pavement, he had stripped off his flannel shirt to wrap a tiny, cold puppy while paramedics worked on Mira. He remembered the feel of the tiny heart starting to beat stronger against his palm. "Oh, God," he whispered. The beagle, that same puppy, looked up at him with knowing dark eyes. Wren moved closer. "Silas? What is it?" "It's him." Silas's voice cracked. "This dog, he was there that night. The runt of the litter Mira was transporting when she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned on Wren's face. "That's why he wouldn't leave you. He remembered your scent from that night." The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. All this time, the dog's fierce loyalty hadn't been random. It was a connection forged in the worst moments of both their lives. A tiny pup fighting for survival, while Silas fought to save his wife. Grief, fresh and raw, tore through him. Silas buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The beagle whined softly and pressed his head against Silas's chest. Through his tears, Silas wrapped his arms around the dog, holding on as waves of emotion crashed over him. "I couldn't save her," he whispered into the dog's fur, "but I saved you." Wren quietly pulled up another chair, her presence steady and supportive as Silas worked through the storm of feelings. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but clear. "I've been calling him the Little Shadow," Silas said hoarsely, "but he needs a real name." "What about Cedar?" Wren suggested gently. "For strength that endures." Silas looked down at the dog, at Cedar, and managed a weak smile. "Cedar," he repeated. "Yeah, that fits." He straightened in his chair, wiping his eyes. The case file still lay open before him, but now every document, every photo carried new weight. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about justice, for Cedar, for all the other animals that had disappeared into Latch's system, and yes, for Mira. "They took you from that crash site," he told Cedar softly, "routed you into their pipeline when you should have been safe, and look what they did to you." His fingers traced the chemical burns on Cedar's paws. "But you found your way back. You knew exactly where to go for help." Wren began gathering the scattered photos, reorganizing them with new purpose. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" "It does." Silas's voice had found its strength again. "Because now we know for certain there's a direct link between Mira's crash and Latch's operation. Cedar is living proof that animals from that transport ended up in their system, and not by accident." Cedar wagged his tail, as if confirming the theory. The late sun caught his fur, highlighting the scars that marked his journey from that rainy night to this moment. Silas felt something shift inside him, grief transforming into resolve, pain focusing into purpose. He pulled out a fresh notepad and began writing, his pen moving with renewed determination. Every detail mattered now. Dates, times, medical records that could trace Cedar's path through Latch's facility. The dog settled at his feet, a warm presence anchoring him to the task. "I don't believe in coincidences anymore," Silas said quietly. "Cedar finding his way here, recognizing my scent after all this time. It means something. Mira always said every animal deserves a chance at justice. She died trying to give them that chance." He looked down at Cedar, seeing both the vulnerable puppy from that tragic night and the resilient survivor he'd become. "We're going to finish what she started. Together." The office grew darker as evening approached, but Silas kept working. Cedar stayed close, his presence a reminder that some bonds, forged in moments of crisis and compassion, never truly break. They only grow stronger, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true significance. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silas's clinic floor as he gathered his team around the examination table. Cedar sat alertly at his feet, tail thumping against the linoleum. The familiar faces looked back at him with determination. Wren with her notebook open, June adjusting her camera strap, and Deputy Pierce reviewing a thick manila folder. "We need to be smart about this," Silas said, spreading out a rough sketch of Latch's facility. "One wrong move and those animals disappear forever." June nodded, pointing to specific locations on the diagram. "I've mapped out 3 concealed vantage points with clear sightlines to the loading area. Timestamps and geotags will verify every photo." "And I've got 4 deputies on standby," Pierce added, his voice steady. "They'll maintain distance until we have probable cause, but they'll be ready to move fast." Wren cleared her throat, her fingers twisting nervously. "I talked to my brother last night. Tommy's willing to help." The room went quiet. Everyone knew the risk involved in turning an insider, especially one with family ties. "Are you sure about this?" Silas asked gently. Wren's jaw set firmly. He wants out. He's been loading and unloading for Latch for 6 months, but he never knew how bad it was until... She swallowed hard. Until he saw what they did to Cedar. Cedar's ears perked up at his name. Silas reached down to scratch behind them, feeling the scarred tissue beneath the fur. "Your brother understands the risks?" Pierce asked. "Once he's wired, there's no backing out." "He does." Wren's voice grew stronger. "He'll wear the mic. All he wants is immunity, and his name kept out of it." Pierce pulled out a document. "Already drafted the confidential informant agreement. We'll need his signature before anything moves forward." Silas studied the facility diagram again. The key is making Latch believe he has to take Cedar back. His ego won't let him ignore training stock that got away. "Especially not after you've challenged him publicly," June added. "He'll want to prove his ownership rights." They spent the next hour mapping out precise positions and timing. Pierce detailed the technical specifications of the wire Tommy would wear, explaining how to avoid interference and maintain clear audio. June marked photo angles that would capture faces and vehicle plates without being obvious. The plan took shape. Tommy would arrive for his regular shift, wearing the wire. Once inside, he'd mentioned seeing Cedar at the clinic, triggering Latch's possessive instincts. When Latch demanded recovery, Tommy would volunteer to handle the pickup, giving them a documented chain of custody. "We'll need Cedar ready," Silas said, looking down at the dog. "The noise and handling could trigger his trauma." Wren pulled out a training harness. "We can work with him every day. Get him used to the equipment, the sounds, the movements." Over the next week, they conditioned Cedar carefully. Silas and Wren used positive reinforcement to help him associate the harness with safety. They played recordings of truck engines and kennel doors, rewarding calm responses. Cedar proved remarkably resilient, as if he understood the importance of their work. Tommy met them in secret, late one night after his shift. He was younger than Silas expected, with Wren's same auburn hair and determined expression. "I should have spoken up sooner," Tommy said, his hands shaking slightly as he signed the confidential informant papers. "The things I've seen in there, the way they treat those animals." Wren squeezed her brother's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." Pierce showed Tommy how to position the wire, where to tap if he needed to signal distress, and how to maintain natural movement without creating static. They ran through test recordings until Tommy's voice came through clear and steady. "Remember," Pierce instructed, "we need Latch on tape explicitly connecting himself to the operation. Location details, training methods, money flow, anything that proves he's running more than a legitimate kennel." Tommy nodded grimly. "Trust me, he loves to talk about his system when he thinks everyone's on his side." They established emergency signals and exit routes. June mapped out timing for each phase, coordinating with Pierce's backup units. Every detail had to align perfectly, both for evidence collection and for Cedar's safety. "The hardest part will be letting them take him," Silas admitted, watching Cedar doze in his corner bed. "Even knowing it's temporary." "We'll have eyes on him the whole time," June assured him. "The minute we have what we need, Pierce's team moves in." They ran through the sequence again and again until every person knew their role by heart. Tommy practiced natural ways to steer conversations toward incriminating topics. June tested light angles and shutter speeds for different times of day. Pierce confirmed response times from various positions. Cedar's training progressed steadily. He learned to remain calm when handled by strangers, to wait quietly in transport crates, to trust that Silas would return for him. Each small victory felt like a step toward justice. "He's ready," Wren declared one evening, after Cedar had calmly endured a full simulation. "And so are we." Silas knelt beside Cedar, running his hands over the dog's healed scars. "What do you think, boy? Ready to help us take down the bad guys?" Cedar's tail wagged once, decisively. His dark eyes held steady trust, not just in Silas, but in his own strength to face his fears. The team gathered one final time to review contingencies. Pierce confirmed his deputies were briefed and positioned. June double-checked her equipment and sight lines. Tommy adjusted his wire until it sat comfortably. Wren organized their documentation, everything dated and witnessed. "Tomorrow, then," Silas said quietly, looking at each face in turn. They all nodded, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. Cedar pressed against his leg, solid and warm. In his eyes, Silas saw reflections of every animal that had disappeared into Latch's operation, and the promise of justice finally within reach. The sun was setting as they dispersed to their positions, each carrying a piece of the plan that would bring truth to light. Cedar followed Silas to his truck, jumping in without hesitation. Together they drove home through the gathering dusk, ready for whatever the morning would bring. The morning air hung heavy with purpose as Tommy pulled into Latch family kennels, his work boots crunching on gravel. He adjusted the wire beneath his flannel shirt one last time before punching in his employee code. The security system beeped its acceptance, and he stepped into the polished front office. Burke Latch's voice boomed from down the hall. "That you, Tommy? Need you in the training room." Tommy's heart thundered, but his voice stayed steady. "Coming, Mr. Latch." In the monitoring van parked 3 blocks away, Deputy Pierce adjusted his headphones, nodding to June as the audio came through crystal clear. Wren sat rigid beside them, Her fingers twisted together as she listened to her brother's footsteps echo through the speakers. Inside the facility, Tommy found Latch standing over a metal table covered in paperwork. "Got some special conditioning to review," Latch said, shuffling through forms. "High-end buyers coming in next week. Need our stock ready." "Yes, sir," Tommy replied, positioning himself exactly as they'd practiced. "Speaking of stock, saw something interesting at Truitt's clinic yesterday." Latch's head snapped up. "Oh?" "That Beagle mix that went missing. The one with the belly scar, he's there." In the van, Pierce scribbled notes, marking timestamps. "Conditioning. Buyers. That's fight ring terminology right there." Latch's voice grew sharp. "You're certain?" "Same markings, same scar pattern. Has to be one of ours. Matches the training group from last month." "That meddling vet," Latch muttered. "He's cost us enough already. Call Marcus and—" The facility's front door chimed. Right on schedule, Silas walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. He carried a thick manila envelope and wore his most professional expression. "Mr. Latch," Silas said evenly, "I have a warrant requesting third-party custody review for the animal currently in my care, along with documentation of suspected abuse requiring investigation." Latch's practiced smile appeared. "Dr. Truitt, this is becoming quite the habit." Tommy used the distraction to slip away, letting the wire capture the confrontation, while he moved toward the back offices as planned. Outside, June circled the building's perimeter, her camera clicking steadily as she documented vehicle plates, security cameras, and access points. Each shot was timestamp tagged and GPS marked, building their evidence chain methodically. In the front office, Latch examined the warrant with exaggerated care. "This seems rather excessive for a simple kennel dispute." "The injuries aren't simple," Silas countered. "Chemical burns, surgical tampering, evidence of forced breeding, all documented and verified by county oversight." While they spoke, Pierce's team executed their own warrant on the facility's back sections. Deputies moved efficiently through the kennels, identifying and cataloging dogs with suspicious injuries. A young German shepherd with facial scars. A pit bull mix with wrapped paws. Each animal was photographed, scanned for chips, and carefully loaded into transport vehicles. Tommy's voice whispered through the wire. "In the office, filing cabinet has a false back. There's a second ledger." Pierce touched his radio. "Move on that office, now." The sound of boots in the hallway made Latch turn. His smile finally cracked as deputies emerged with boxes of papers and the hidden ledger. "This is harassment," he blustered. "I'll have your badges for this." "Your cooperation is appreciated," Pierce said, stepping into view. "But not required. We have sufficient cause for a full inspection of the premises." More deputies appeared, leading dogs toward waiting transport vans. June documented each transfer, her camera capturing the moment a deputy found a cabinet full of shock collars and weighted training vests. Latch's face darkened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. One phone call has already been made," Pierce cut in, "to the State Attorney General's office. They're very interested in your operation, Mr. Latch." Silas watched the scene unfold, feeling the weight of months of pressure finally shifting. Outside, June's camera kept clicking. Transport vans were loaded carefully. Evidence bags were sealed and labeled. In the midst of it all, Silas thought of Cedar waiting safely at the clinic with Wren. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "It's happening. We got them." The hidden ledger proved to be a gold mine. Pierce flipped through pages of coded entries, dates, dollar amounts, and initialed transactions that mapped perfectly to known fight locations. "Your training facility paperwork is quite thorough," Pierce noted, holding up the ledger in an evidence bag. "I'm sure our forensic accountants will find it very educational." Deputies continued their systematic sweep, uncovering more training equipment tucked behind false walls. Every item was photographed, logged, and bagged. June captured it all, building their visual record of the operation's true nature. The morning stretched on as the facility was methodically dismantled. Rescue groups arrived to help transport the recovered dogs to vetted shelters. Silas examined each animal briefly, marking urgent cases for immediate medical attention. Tommy stayed carefully in the background, playing his role of surprised employee, while Wren coordinated intake paperwork from the clinic. Their months of preparation unfolded exactly as planned. By early afternoon, the main facility stood nearly empty. Pierce supervised the final evidence collection while Latch seethed under deputy watch. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the operation's ugly truth. Silas took one last walk through the kennels, noting details for his written statement. The echoing silence felt like victory. No more barking in pain, no more scared whimpers from the shadows. He stopped in the doorway, remembering Cedar's first frightened dash to his side. That one brave dog had sparked the investigation that finally exposed years of abuse. Now, because of Cedar's trust and their team's dedication, dozens of dogs would have a chance at real homes. "Dr. Truitt," Pierce called, "we're ready for your official statement whenever you're done here." Silas nodded, taking a final look at the empty facility. "I'm done," he said firmly. "Let's finish this." They walked out into the sunlight together. June's camera captured their exit while transport vans pulled away with their rescued cargo. The nightmare wasn't fully over. There would be court dates and testimony ahead, but its power was broken. In his pocket, Silas's phone buzzed with another text from Wren. "Cedar says hurry home. He's got victory kisses waiting." For the first time in months, Silas felt the weight lift from his shoulders. They had done it. They had actually done it. The truth was out, the evidence was secured, and the dogs were safe. The night air carried a bitter chill as Silas drove toward the temporary holding warehouse. They'd secured the rescued dogs there while arrangements were made for transport to certified shelters. His headlights caught the first wisps of smoke threading through the darkness, and his heart dropped. Orange flames licked up the warehouse's eastern wall. The fire spread fast, too fast to be natural. Through the crackle of burning wood, he heard frantic barking from inside. "Wren!" he shouted, bursting from his truck. She'd stayed late to monitor sedation levels on the more aggressive cases. His phone showed a text from just 15 minutes ago. "All quiet here, just doing final checks." The warehouse door stuck, warped by heat. Silas threw his shoulder against it until the frame splintered. Smoke billowed, out, thick and chemical. He pulled his flannel shirt over his nose and plunged inside. "Wren, where are you?" "Back corner." Her voice was muffled, choked. "The ceiling's coming down." Through the haze, he saw her crouched beside a large kennel holding 3 pit bull mixes. They snarled and lunged at the bars, terrified by the flames. A support beam had fallen across the cage door, pinning it shut. "Hold on!" Silas fought his way toward her, the smoke burning his eyes. The dog's panic made them dangerous. Fear could override any previous training. A shadow moved in his peripheral vision. Too late, he registered the whistle of something swinging through the air. Pain exploded across his shoulders as a crowbar struck him from behind. Burke Latch emerged from the smoke like a demon, his face twisted with rage. "Should have stayed in your lane, Doc." He raised the crowbar again. A tan and white blur shot past Silas's legs. Cedar, who must have followed him in, launched himself at Latch's arm. His teeth sank deep, The crowbar clattered to the concrete floor as Latch howled. Silas didn't waste the moment. He grabbed a sedation kit from his medical bag and lunged toward the pit bull kennel. The largest dog, a brindle male, snapped at the bars with foam-flecked jaws. One careful shot with the injector, and the dog's aggression began to fade. "Cover your face," he yelled to Wren, who had slumped against the wall. The smoke was getting to her. He shrugged off his shirt and pressed it against her nose and mouth. The warehouse groaned. More beams shifted overhead, showering them with sparks. Silas heard a familiar hiss. Propane tanks in the storage area. If the fire reached them. He wrapped his hands around the fallen beam. The wood was hot enough to blister, but he heaved upward with everything he had. Splinters drove into his palms. Blood ran down his wrists. The beam moved an inch, then another. "Wren, can you stand?" She nodded weakly. "Get that oxygen mask from my bag. Put it on and stay low." Cedar kept Latch cornered, growling whenever the man tried to move. The other pit bulls had grown quieter, the sedative taking effect. Silas's shoulders screamed as he lifted the beam higher. "Now, get them out!" Wren fumbled with the kennel latch, then guided the groggy dogs towards the door. The smoke was thickening, taking on an oily quality that meant something toxic was burning. Silas's lungs felt like they were filling with glass. A sharp crack overhead. Another beam giving way. Silas dove, covering Wren as burning timber crashed down where they'd been standing. The impact sent Cedar yelping to the side, giving Latch an opening to bolt for the door. "Let him go!" Silas pulled Wren to her feet. "We need to move!" The propane tanks weren't just hissing now. They were screaming. The heat had become unbearable, melting plastic and warping metal. Silas half-carried Wren toward the exit, Cedar pressing against his legs. They burst into the cold night. Air, just as the first tank exploded. The blast wave knocked them forward onto the gravel. Silas covered Wren and Cedar with his body, as debris rained down around them. Through ringing ears, he heard sirens approaching. Fire trucks and police cruisers appeared at the end of the access road, their lights painting the smoke red and blue. Wren coughed violently beside him, but she was breathing. Cedar whined and licked his face. Silas's hands were raw meat, his back one massive bruise from the crowbar. But as he watched the warehouse burn, he felt a fierce satisfaction. Burke Latch had tried to destroy the evidence, but he'd failed. The most important evidence was already safe. Photographs, documents, and sworn statements. And now they could add attempted murder to the charges. EMTs rushed forward with oxygen tanks and burn kits. Silas waved them toward Wren first, then submitted to treatment himself. Cedar refused to leave his side as they cleaned and wrapped his hands. "Dr. Truitt!" Deputy Pierce's voice cut through the chaos. "We've got units looking for Latch. Did you see which way he went?" Silas started to answer, but another coughing fit took him. He pointed toward the back access road instead. "Let the police handle Latch. Silas's job was saving lives, not taking them." More rescue vehicles arrived. The fire department fought to contain the blaze before it could spread to nearby buildings. Animal control officers helped secure the remaining dogs, who were miraculously all alive thanks to Wren's quick thinking with the sedatives. Through it all, Cedar stayed pressed against Silas's leg, his fur singed, but his spirit unbroken. They had survived Burke's last desperate attack together. The evidence might be ash, but the truth had already blazed too bright to hide. Through the thick smoke, Cedar suddenly perked up. His ears twitched, and he pulled away from Silas's side. The little beagle mix limped purposefully toward a section of the warehouse that was still partially intact, whining and pawing at what looked like a plain metal door. "Dr. Truitt!" Deputy Pierce called out, jogging over. "What's he found?" Silas struggled to his feet, wincing as his burned hands protested. Cedar's got something. He's never wrong about these things. The door was solid steel with a heavy-duty lock, way more secure than anything else in the building. Pierce examined it closely, then stepped back. "Stand clear," he ordered, drawing his service weapon. 2 precise shots to the lock mechanism, and the door swung open with a groan. The smoke wasn't as thick inside this hidden room. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a large desk dominated the space. But what caught their attention were the stacks of ledgers and papers spread across every surface. "This isn't the public office," Pierce said, pulling out his flashlight. "This is where the real business happened." Silas could see it now. Detailed breeding records, fight statistics, winners' purses, names, dates, locations. Everything they needed to prove what Latch had been doing. The ledger they'd seized earlier had been a careful fiction, but these books told the ugly truth. "We need to get this out now." Pierce started grabbing documents. "The roof won't hold much longer." As if on cue, a thunderous crack echoed above them. Burning timber crashed down just outside the office door. Cedar barked urgently, tugging at Silas's pant leg. "Here." Pierce tossed Silas a heavy-duty evidence bag. "Everything you can grab, contracts, ledgers, anything with names or numbers." They worked frantically, stuffing papers and books into the bags while the fire roared closer. Sweat poured down their faces, and the smoke was getting thicker by the second. Cedar kept up a steady stream of warning barks. A section of ceiling collapsed in the main warehouse area, sending a shower of sparks through the doorway. The heat was becoming unbearable. "That's all we can get." Pierce sealed the last evidence bag. "Move." They stumbled out just as another support beam gave way. The hidden office disappeared behind a curtain of flame and falling debris. In the distance, sirens were getting louder. Fire trucks finally arriving. June Hollis appeared through the smoke, camera already clicking. She circled the building's perimeter, documenting everything. The strange burn patterns that suggested accelerant use, empty gas cans tossed in the weeds. The location of the hidden office before water and flame erased it all. "Over here," Silas called to the approaching EMTs. Wren was propped against a concrete barrier, coughing but conscious. Her eyes were red and swollen from the smoke. "Easy," Silas murmured, holding an oxygen mask to her face while the medical team assessed her. "Just breathe." Pierce worked methodically nearby, marking and sealing each evidence bag. His face was grim but satisfied as he logged the contents. "This is what we needed," he said. "Account books, client lists, fight records, everything that ties Latch directly to the operation. No deniability here." Firefighters were attacking the blaze now, their hoses sending huge arcs of water into the inferno. The warehouse was probably a total loss, but they could still save the surrounding buildings. Cedar pressed against Silas's leg, trembling slightly but alert. His fur was singed in places, and his paws were red from the hot concrete, but he'd led them to exactly what they needed. Without his keen nose and determination, those records would have gone up in smoke with everything else. "Good boy," Silas whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You did it. You really did it." June finished her circuit of the building and joined them, reviewing the shots on her camera's display. "I've got everything documented. The separate office structure, the reinforced door, the accelerant trails. If they try to claim this was just an accident, these photos will tell a different story." Wren's breathing was steadier now. She pushed the oxygen mask aside briefly. "Where's Latch?" Pierce shook his head. "Gone, but not for long. I've got units at every exit from the county, and his description is out to all surrounding jurisdictions. He just bought himself a manhunt on top of everything else." The fire was finally dying down. more smoke than flame now. Dawn wasn't far off, and the first hints of gray were appearing in the eastern sky. Silas looked at the evidence bags, safely stowed in Pierce's cruiser. All those careful records of cruelty and corruption, preserved despite Latch's desperate attempt to destroy them. Cedar had done more than just lead them to evidence. He'd helped them prove that sometimes the smallest and most wounded among us could bring down the mighty. That justice, while slow, was still possible when good people refused to look away. The little beagle Mix sat quietly now, watching the firefighters work. His tail thumped gently against Silas's boot. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The vet who'd lost his way, and the dog who helped him find it again. Emergency vehicles continued to arrive, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. The air was thick with smoke and steam, but for the first time in hours, Silas could breathe a little easier. They had what they needed. The truth would come out. And Burke Latch's reign of cruelty was finally, irrevocably, coming to an end. Deputy Pierce stood in front of the evidence wall, carefully pinning another document in place. The hidden ledger had yielded a goldmine of information, names, dates, dollar amounts that told a story of corruption stretching back years. Combined with the audio recordings from Wren's brother and June's detailed photographs of the arson scene, they had an airtight case. "Time to move," Pierce announced, reaching for his radio. Within minutes, the warrant requests were flowing through channels, backed by ironclad evidence that even the most hesitant judge couldn't ignore. The first warrant came through at 8:15 in the morning. Burke Latch, wanted for racketeering, animal cruelty, and first-degree arson. The second followed 30 minutes later. Myron Hobbins, for corruption and abuse of office. June Hollis sat at her desk at the county paper, fingers flying over her keyboard as she crafted the story that would break it all wide open. Her timeline was meticulous, photographs arranged in chronological order, each one dated and captioned. There was the spotless front office at Latch Kennels, the hidden training rings, the injured dogs, the warehouse fire, the recovered ledgers. She worked through lunch, determined to have the story ready for tomorrow's front page. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the call came in. A state trooper had spotted Latch's SUV heading for the county line. When they pulled him over, they found $10,000 in cash and a packed suitcase in the trunk. The man who'd ruled the county, through fear and favors, was led away in handcuffs, his carefully maintained image crumbling. Hobbins didn't wait for the deputies to come knocking. His lawyer called the station at 4 o'clock. He would surrender voluntarily. He arrived in a pressed suit, but his face was ashen. The weight of his choices seemed to have finally caught up with him. At the clinic, Silas received word that all charges against him had been dropped. The theft of property case had evaporated in the face of overwhelming evidence of Latch's criminal enterprise. He sat at his desk, watching Cedar sleep peacefully beneath it. The little dog's scarred paws twitched as he dreamed. Better dreams now, Silas hoped. Wren appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "We've got 28 dogs to process," she said. "All need full workups, documentation of injuries, and placement assessments." Silas nodded, rising from his chair. Cedar's eyes opened immediately, and he followed them into the treatment area. The kennels were full of former fighting dogs, pit bulls, mastiffs, and mixed breeds who'd never known kindness until now. "This one's ready for evaluation," Wren said, opening a kennel door. A brindle pit bull wagged her tail hopefully. Her face bore old scars, but her eyes were gentle. "I'm thinking she'd do well with that retired couple out on Ridge Road. They've got 2 acres fenced, lots of experience with rescue dogs." They worked through the afternoon, examining each dog, documenting their conditions, and making placement notes. Instead of fight weights and win-loss records, Their charts now showed personality traits, compatibility assessments, and recommended home environments. Each animal was being transformed from a betting slip to a beloved pet. "Look at this," Silas said softly, checking a young shepherd mix's microchip. "He was reported stolen 6 months ago. Family's still looking for him." Wren smiled, making a note. One happy reunion coming up. The front page of tomorrow's paper was already set. June had sent over a preview. "Criminal enterprise exposed. Animal fighting ring. Leaders arrested." The subheading read, "County officials implicated in years-long cover-up." The story wasn't gossip or rumor. It was fact, supported by photographs, documents, and official charges. Cedar padded from kennel to kennel, greeting each dog with a gentle sniff. Some of them remembered him from their time in Latch's facility. Others were new faces, but all of them shared the same story. Survivors of cruelty who would now have a chance at the life they deserved. "We'll need to coordinate with rescue groups," Silas said, updating his files. "Some of these dogs will need specialized rehabilitation before they're ready for adoption." Wren nodded, already pulling up her contact list. "I've got calls out to 3 different organizations. They're ready to help with placement and training." The afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows, painting warm squares on the floor. In one of them, Cedar had settled down for another nap, his work done for now. The nightmare of Burke Latch's operation was over. Justice was moving forward through proper channels. And in this quiet clinic, surrounded by the dogs they'd helped save, Silas and Wren continued their work, not just treating injuries, but healing spirits and building futures, one animal at a time. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as the proceedings began. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor where Cedar sat pressed against Silas's leg, both of them watching the scene unfold. The fire investigator took the stand first, pointing to enlarged photographs of the warehouse. "These burn patterns here and here," he indicated with a laser pointer, "show accelerant use consistent with deliberate ignition. The propane tanks were intentionally placed near load-bearing supports." The forensic accountant followed, methodically walking through the recovered ledger. "These entries correlate to known fight dates," she explained, highlighting columns of numbers. "Cash deposits align with betting patterns typical of illegal gaming operations." When the audio recordings played, Burke Latch's confident smirk faltered. His voice filled the courtroom, discussing conditioning and match preparation in terms that left no doubt about the operation's true nature. Silas testified next, his voice steady as he detailed Cedar's injuries. The chemical burns on his paws were consistent with caustic cleaning agents. The microchip showed signs of tampering, deliberately damaged to hide his origin. He described the pattern of injuries he'd documented in other dogs from Latch's facility. Wren's testimony about the warehouse fire brought the horror of that night into sharp focus. "The smoke was thick, but I could hear the dogs panicking in their cages. If Dr. Truitt hadn't gotten us out—" Her voice caught, then steadied. Deputy Pierce laid out the evidence chain with precise clarity, each document and photograph properly logged and secured. The defense attorney tried to spin talk of specialized training methods and competitive breeding, but the weight of evidence crushed these paper-thin excuses. The judge's ruling came down like a hammer. Custody of the animal known as Cedar is awarded to Dr. Silas Truitt. All sanctions against his practice are hereby vacated. He fixed Latch with a stern gaze. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. In the marble hallway, June raised her camera one last time. Through her lens, she captured the moment of justice. Burke Latch and Myron Hobbins in handcuffs, their faces drawn, while Silas stood tall with Cedar pressing close against his knee, both of them finally free of shadows. The late autumn sunlight warmed the clinic's waiting room as Silas knelt beside a chocolate lab, demonstrating gentle exercises to the Anderson family. 10 minutes twice a day, he explained, guiding their daughter's hand along the dog's healing leg. Jenny here will be running circles around you in no time. Over the following weeks, each rescued dog found their way to carefully chosen homes. The Martinez family welcomed a gentle pit mix who'd become inseparable from their autistic son. The widowed Mrs. Chen adopted a three-legged terrier that matched her determined spirit. Each placement came with detailed care instructions and Silas's personal phone number. One quiet evening, Silas stood in the treatment room, holding Mira's flannel shirt. Though washed clean of smoke and ash, the blue and gray plaid still held the memory of that rainy night. He mounted it in a simple frame above the sink, where he'd always see it during procedures. Not as a weight, but as a reminder of why he chose this path. June stopped by with prints from the courthouse, but Silas simply squeezed her hand. When Pierce delivered the final case paperwork, their exchange was equally brief, a nod that carried the weight of all they'd accomplished. Some victories needed no speeches. In the office, Wren organized the last of the recovery files while Cedar dozed under the desk. "We could grab dinner," she suggested carefully, "now that we're not surviving a crisis." Silas looked up from his charts, seeing the same quiet strength that had stood beside him through fire and fear. "I'd like that," he said softly. They both carried scars, visible and hidden, but perhaps that made them better able to understand each other. As dusk settled over the clinic's gravel lot, Silas stepped outside for a final check of the kennels. Cedar pressed against his leg, ever the faithful shadow, but different now. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by contentment. Silas scratched behind the dog's ears, understanding at last that Cedar's determined tracking hadn't been about escape or fighting. It had been about finding home. Standing there in the growing dark, Silas felt the pieces of his life settling into a new pattern. Not perfect, not unmarked by loss, but whole in its own way. Cedar's warm weight against his leg anchored him to this moment, this choice to begin again. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.